Welcome to the ID Club National Fun League. For the first time since our Super Bowl recap, we are back. Josh Peterson and Mike Schaefer of Husker 24/7 Sports with you. Schaef, hello. How are you on this fine Wednesday morning in mid-March?
I'm just hoping against all hope that not only will I not have, I'm going to have JJ McCarthy on the roster no matter what, but a combination of JJ McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers could possibly send me to the point of protesting against the season. And I don't want to do that. And I don't think it's actually going to happen, but the amount of people that have taken time out of their lives to inquire about if I'd be interested in the Vikings adding Aaron Rodgers, as if they have never listened to me talk about Aaron Rodgers before, as if for some reason, whenever they have ever considered Aaron Rodgers, they thought, you know who would probably want to watch him on his team?
Mike Schaefer.
Yeah. And for some people, Parker Gabriel, it is a troll job that is not elaborate. It is very, very obviously how hilarious would this be? For other people, I can't tell if there's an earnest nature of, Aaron Rodgers is available and the Vikings now need a quarterback to go alongside JJ McCarthy. That kind of makes sense. He seems like the sort of guy who would come in and accept a minimized role in a place where culture is really valuable and they tend to be more about the team than the individual. That sounds like Aaron Rodgers. I bet Mike Schaefer would be excited about that. And it turns out, no, I would not.
No, can you explain to the folks, because obviously part of this joke, I have to imagine, part of this troll job from people is, hey, you guys did sign Brett Favre that one time, and you had Brett Favre on the team, and you went to the NFC Championship, and you almost went to the Super Bowl. So people are like, oh, this is the way that a former Packer quarterback's career has to end. He goes to the Jets, and then he goes to the Vikings. Can you tell us where you were at in 2009 with that move compared to if it were to happen today with this move?
I would be a lot more upset. But part of it is we know way more about Brett Favre individually now, like his personality and his just sheer douchebaggery, I guess, for the lack of a better term.
The way he likes to text people.
The stealing from poor people, if you will.
Yes.
Just generally terrible things. We know a lot more about Aaron Rodgers, who has never stolen from poor people. I want to point that out. I mean, it's funny because if I asked this question to Packers fans a lot in the last couple of years, where I was like, hey, you're playing in a charity foursome, and you get the choice between having to sit with Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre for an 18-hole round in your golf cart. Who would you rather spend time with? Everyone picked Favre. And these are Packers fans. Like, there's like four of them. But they all pick Favre, and they're like, he just seems like it would be a more enjoyable time because he is a good old boy. Like, that's what he is. And that doesn't make him not a terrible person, which he also is. But again, if you're like, hey, who would you rather spend time with? I'll choose the guy who's done terrible things to people over the guy who just seems like he can't wait to do terrible things. It's very odd, but man, my hatred for Aaron Rodgers far exceeds wherever I was at in 2009 for Brett Favre. And I was not excited. I didn't want it. I didn't want Tavarius Jackson and Gus Frerotte again either. So it was like, you can't have everything here. And that Vikings team was set up to be really, really good, and it needed a quarterback. And Brett Favre came in the first couple games. It was like, okay, this is kind of what it is.
But then the
49ers game, he hits the pass to Greg Lewis, who's still one of my all-time favorite plays. That just watching it and just being absolutely shocked that they had won. And it just kind of like won me over at that point. I never consider Brett Favre like a Minnesota Viking. I don't consider him like a Vikings legend. Obviously, everything that happened in 2010 sort of mitigated everything that happened in 2009.
Yeah.
The end of the 2009 season remains as aggravating and frustrating as anything possibly could when you feel very strongly that you were watching the best team in the NFL and they just step on their dick over and over and over against a massively overrated Saints team that did win the Super Bowl that year. It unbelievably frustrating. So thank you for putting me in a time to go back to that. But yeah, I don't want Aaron Rodgers. Part of it is watching him last year.
He sucks.
Hooked. I don't care what
his bad
interception ratio is. He's throwing on average like 5.5 yards down the field. I don't want to see Justin Jefferson with 17 catches and 64 yards. I don't want to see that. I don't need to see Aaron Rodgers laying on the turf of US Bank Stadium with his helmet and chin strap over his nose and his eyes making some sort of weird expression. I don't want to see like sad, forlorn Aaron Rodgers on the bench because the Vikings are down 35-14 because he's thrown 2 just mind-numbingly bad interceptions at this stage in his career. Nobody wants to see that. Like, part of it is I don't think anybody wants him because why would you want to deal with the personality? But also, you definitely don't want to deal with the personality if he can't play at the level that he used to. And we have nothing but a downward trend in his career. So I hope the Minnesota Vikings avoid it. And given Kevin O'Connell's general belief in team building culture, it does not make any sense to me. Now, freaking high knees in the middle of the plane going over to London, Russell Wilson, that unfortunately feels like it could be a real thing. But I think he would be brought in as only a backup to JJ McCarthy or a solution early in the season, a la Donovan McNabb ahead of Christian Ponder.
Couple comments coming in, and we appreciate everyone for joining us on this Wednesday morning.
Look at you folks getting here on a Wednesday morning on an unscheduled National Fun League because you love fun and you love the NFL and you tolerate us.
There we go. Let's see. Matt writes, Favre seems like his terribleness was a corruption of his true self, while Rodgers feels like he hasn't come into his truest terrible form yet. I think that fits with what you said a few minutes ago. He also adds, I love how you both seem to enjoy hearing each other's agony for being a fan. You both understand it completely, though they are different. Yeah, they definitely are. Also, Furls is hanging out this morning, and Furls is going through it right now because Furls is a Seahawks fan, and they are doing moves that he does not like. But he was the one who asked us, hey, when are you guys doing another National Fun League? To which he added, it is my favorite NFL podcast. I sent that to you, and here we are recording. So to kind of kick off, Schaef, like the broad discussion of the pod today, I did want to ask you, because I reached out and you said, I'd actually been meaning to see if you wanted to do an NFL pod. Here we are.
Yeah, it's funny because I was like, I should text Josh and see if we can, because I have a pretty open morning on Wednesdays, and it was like, okay, this could be good. And then I just never sent the text, and then you sent the text, and I was like, oh, hey, I've been meaning
here
to
we
do
are.
that.
What was the thing? What was the move or moves in particular that you were like, okay, I really, really want to hop on the mic and talk about that, and we can kind of use that into the entry point of what's going on in free agency right now in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, the big one for me is everything that happened with Sam Darnold. I mean, that was such a fascinating last couple of weeks. I was on your radio program, 1620 on your AM dials, or 1620thezone.com if you use the internet. Or if you want to use an app, I believe that they have an app as well for 1620, of which you can listen to 1620. And I was on your radio show and was discussing with you. I think it was more off air. I don't even know how much was on air, because there was like the rumors like, oh, the market could be a little soft for Darnold. The Vikings might be interested in bringing him back on a short contract. And I was like, gimme. And so then you see where Sam Darnold goes. Seattle makes sense. They just traded Geno Smith. They could use a quarterback. And you see what he was paid, and it's less than what Baker Mayfield got when you factor in the raised cap and the inflation. I was a little bit taken back, like, wow, Minnesota's spending $10 million a year for Aaron Jones at running back, and they're spending $22 million a season for Byron Murphy at corner. And they're like, you know what? We can't pay 30 average annual value plus whatever you would do with how you want to structure it. I mean, NFL contracts are just a roller coaster. They don't make a ton of sense to me.
Just massage it early. I mean, you could count of like $5 million against your cap now.
Right. And so, like, the fact that they weren't willing to do that with Darnold at what seemed like a discount for someone who just threw 34 touchdowns just remains somewhat shocking to me. But like all things, it, I think, comes back to They invested draft capital in JJ McCarthy.
Yeah.
Kwesi really couldn't probably afford another failed first-round pick, so they have to invest in McCarthy. Kwesi's entire job, I think, is lined up with JJ McCarthy. Like, so if this doesn't work, he would have already failed with Lewis Cine. It remains to be seen what happens with Dallas Turner. They have traded draft capital and traded for draft capital and have not produced a lot out of their roster of guys, that they've drafted. Free agency has been what has saved the Vikings last season. And so it was like alarming to me. They're not bringing him back when he's just cheap. What are they going to do? And then they just went and signed everybody they could for the interior of the defensive line and the interior of the offensive line. So now it feels like they have a relatively strong roster and the diary of a wimpy kid starting at quarterback in JJ McCarthy. So, yeah, I mean, his crowning achievement in the 2024 season or 2025, since this was announced during, I think, the Lions game at the very end of the season, is it wasn't announced, but they showed the photo of him, and he clearly had lost like 30 pounds. But he's now up over 200 pounds, guys.
There we go.
First round draft pick, JJ McCarthy, up over 200 pounds. Super Bowl, here we come. All right.
How much? So you mentioned what you did about the Capitol, about you draft this guy. Like, this move is, I guess I have two kind of lanes of one, you drafted him, so you have to use him. You got to figure out what he is. Otherwise, it's a wasted pick, right? Or the other part, and it's both, I think. Did the end of the season damage Sam Darnold so much, or in their eyes, it damaged him as a property that they were like, look, we know what we have with him. We don't know what we have with the other guy. Let's just move on from Darnold. We have the other quarterback on a rookie deal, and let's just move forward. I think it's both of those combined. I mean, it is still wild to me that, not even barely 2 months ago, you and I were discussing the end of the season right before that Lions game, whatever podcast we did after week 17. That's what it was, the Packers game. And how we talked about him then versus what it was 2 weeks later, and now what it is today. It's honestly mind-blowing. But I have to imagine that all of that first-round pick, you got to make sure you use him. And the end of the Darnold run there, they were just like, all right, well, I guess it's time to move forward with the JJ McCarthy era.
Yeah, but the just stunning thing is just how cheap he was. Like, even on the free agent market, where the Steelers needed a quarterback, you could argue the Colts could have used a quarterback. The Seahawks needed a quarterback. The Vikings need something, unless they're just 100% committed to someone who didn't throw a single pass and has thrown less passes in his college career than basically almost one season of like a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix. Wow. So the other thing that I hear a lot, and I'm jumping around, the other thing I hear a lot are people like, oh, wow, this quarterback draft class, like, these guys are all looking like they're going to be hits. That has to make you feel good about McCarthy, who some people liked as much as some of these other players. And it's like, okay, but if I go and look at what they did in their college careers, all of them threw the ball significantly more with as much success. Like, if they're Jaden Daniels, where, he had around the same amount of passes in less games, and 18 more touchdowns to the same amount of interceptions and 1,000 more yards than JJ McCarthy. Like, it is one thing to be excited about someone who won a national championship, who might have physical tools, but he never had to use them in college. And now you're going to the NFL and you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and you're just giving this guy these weapons. And you're like, all right, go do it.
Keys to the car.
Man, good Lord. If it doesn't work, it's going to be a freaking train wreck. And it'll be a train wreck right off the bat. And then there's no real way to get out of it other than, he just needs more time. And then you've got to invest another season in it. And then you're 3 years into JJ McCarthy. And if he's not good by his second season, you've wasted prime Justin Jefferson. Jordan Addison's off his rookie contract and playing for the freaking Jaguars or something at that point. TJ Hawkinson's probably blown his knee out because the Lions have been targeting it since, the first time they traded him. And who the hell knows at that point? I'm just going to be in such a dark place that I don't know what'll happen. But it's one of those, if it doesn't look good this year, it just sets up for such a crappy future outlook. Because as good of a teammate as Justin Jefferson seems to be, when you're the best receiver in the NFL, you
don't
want to play
so
with
long.
a piece of shit quarterback.
Correct.
And he never has so far. And Sam Darnold wasn't supposed to be good, except his arm talent turned out to be elite.
Yeah.
And I mean, we don't know if JJ McCarthy can do that. And maybe he's going to be incredible. And I'll just be sitting here every week marveling about how good he is. And I hope that to be the case. But man, you build a roster that is supposed to contend, and you're just missing that one element. Just that one element.
And it's only the most important element to have.
Quarterback. But hey, you've got a guy who threw for 89 yards against Penn State in a critical win in November. What a gamer.
Are you on an island in your feelings about McCarthy inside of Vikings fandom, or are you too close to the situation in that you hate Michigan, but you also watched Michigan a lot? I mean, you bring up Penn State. Like, it's not his fault that the coach is called runs every single play in the second half. He can't do anything about that. Are you too close to the situation here?
It's possible. I mean, part of it is I didn't want McCarthy to start with. And so then they end up with, and then they end up having Sam Darnold, who plays really well, and they have a fucking 14-win season.
Yeah.
And they're like, we don't want to bring this guy back. We're going to go to the mystery box. Mystery box could be anything. Maybe someday he could be a quarterback that throws for 34 touchdowns and 12 interceptions and has an elite arm talent. But he's on a rookie scale contract. Oh my God, that's the best thing in the entire world. Let's invest a bunch of money in random free agent players and assume that these contracts wouldn't be any worse than a quarterback contract. Part of it that I have right now is that just reading the way that people have assessed the Vikings offseason, it's been, they dumped a lot of money into a 30-year-old Washington Commanders defensive tackle who was pretty good at one point, but he tore his pec last year and missed 8 games, and they're going to pay him $20 million. They put $22 million into Byron Murphy, who prior to last year was atrocious as a corner for Brian Flores. Last year had 6 interceptions, makes a Pro Bowl. Good player, but $22 million annual average value at corner. And it's not like one of the 5 best corners in the league.
Yeah.
But they paid more than every other corner got on the market. That's not a great sign. To retain somebody, you paid more than a guy who wasn't even considered the top available corner than everyone else, and they were on the free agent market. So it's, it's concerning in that regard, and it could work really well. They signed Will Fries and Ryan Kelly. They basically took 2 Colts offensive linemen. Ryan Kelly missed a bunch of time. Will Fries has missed. So a lot of it is going to come down to, will these guys be healthy next year? You've invested a ton of money now into other areas of this roster because you have the cheap quarterback contract.
Yep.
But you kind of need that to work. And the biggest problem I have is I feel like the ceiling for JJ McCarthy is Brock Purdy. And it might be 2024 Brock Purdy, which wasn't that good, instead of 2023 Brock Purdy, where people really pretended was really good until you realize that it was all the pieces around him. And he's going to have pieces around him. So maybe it'll work out.
Hey, to be fair, though, I know Brock Purdy doesn't have the type of NFL arm that Darnold does. But, I mean, could we just say the same thing, that Sam Darnold was just a slightly sexier, taller, better chin version of Brock Purdy? And, especially given the rest of his career.
You could say that. The reason I would push back on it, and, again, this is just completely biased having watched it, the throws that I watched that guy make were kind of good stuff that it felt like maybe 7 other quarterbacks in the league could do. He had a throw, I think it was in the game against the Packers at home, where he just threw what felt like 115 miles an hour into an incredibly tight window to Jefferson, I think, for like a touchdown, or got it to the 1 yard line.
I remember you and I talking about that throw, yeah.
That might be, other than some of the Favre throws, that might be one of the 5 best throws I've ever seen a quarterback from the Vikings make. Like, one of the things about Kirk Cousins was that he had the ability to do a lot of stuff, but his arm wasn't like next level. Why you like Kirk Cousins is that he could get you out of trouble. He usually made the right play or the smart play or the safe play. But he wasn't going to just like dazzle you with aesthetically beautiful passing.
Correct.
Somehow Sam Darnold did, like multiple times last year. But that one throw to the Packers, that is, that's like a Joe Burrow-esque arm, or nobody's on this level, but it's borderline Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. Like, those are the kinds of guys that can make that throw. And Sam Darnold was picked number 3 for a reason. Like,
sure,
there was a ton of belief in his arm talent. And so I keep coming back to that. But we'll see how it plays out. As long as I don't sign Aaron Rodgers, I can at least accept where this thing is headed. I hope to be wrong. Like, I would love to be just completely and utterly wrong about JJ McCarthy. Yeah. I just don't feel like I am.
I really for good content for the pod. Hey, Furls wants to know, what are the odds that the Seahawks get 2024 Sam Darnold? They still need to fix the offensive line. That's probably what it comes down to. Clint Kubiak is going to be their OC in 2025. What do you... Banks is howling right now. He's not a fan of the Seahawks moves, apparently. What do you think of what Seattle is getting for next year?
This is amazing, Banks.
I don't know what's going on. I don't know what is happening.
This upset about DK Metcalf being traded to the Steelers?
Yeah,
are you like your dad and you hate the Steelers too, Banks?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on over there.
You're
with
on
him.
A comfy little dog bed and everything.
Yeah, he's having a good time here in the office today. I don't know what's going on.
Huh. Well, I think that I am very intrigued by how the Seahawks fill out the rest of the offense around Darnold. You have Darnold, you have Kenneth Walker, which is a better running back, and really Charbonnet. I mean, the Walker-Charbonnet combination is a better situation than what he had in Minnesota, but the offensive line is worse. And we saw last year, I mean, teams were able to light up Darnold by getting pressure inside. I suspect that they would be able to do similar with a Seahawks offensive line that wasn't very good. So how do they plan to kind of move that going forward? And then does not having Kevin O'Connell take some of Sam Darnold away? Like, is Kevin O'Connell this sort of super coach that he makes the quarterback?
Yep.
In the way that we think of, Kyle Shanahan. Do you not like Kevin O'Connell either, Banks?
I don't know what is happening right now. There's not like a siren.
Banks, he was the coach of the year. What are you doing? Okay, yes, he's 0-2 in the playoffs. I understand, Banks, but give him a chance, buddy.
I got nothing for you, man. I don't know what is happening right now. Normally he howls because of the sirens, but it's 8 a.m., and I don't hear any sirens. Hopefully someone's not in my home trying to murder me and that I just don't know about right now, and I'm recording a podcast.
Is Riss accounted for? I mean,
she's asleep right now. I texted her.
Then you should be concerned about. You're worried about you being murdered, and your wife is asleep, and you're not even.
I'm worried about all of us
your
being
first
murdered.
Concern.
Man,
wow.
Is Banks saying this is a little too much Sam Darnold talk right now? Is that what he's saying? We've talked about Sam Darnold for 25 minutes. Masquerade says, Josh.
Oh, go ahead.
Josh, I'm a Vikings fan too. To your earlier question, I think before the last 2 games, most fans were inclined to re-up Darnold and see if he could do it again. But then the last 2 games, fair or not, soured a lot of people, and people became okay with moving on and seeing what we have in McCarthy. So there you go. I was just kind of curious about what Vikings fans were feeling, and if you were the outlier or if your opinion was kind of
probably the outlier. I think there's a real excitement for McCarthy because, again, he's a mystery box. He could be anything. But I don't want a mystery box. I want a guy that can play the quarterback position.
Yeah, and you don't want to waste a good roster, which is totally understandable.
That's a lot of it. But to the Seahawks, I'm really curious about Jackson Smith-Njigba as the number 1 wide receiver. I thought this guy was incredibly talented at Ohio State, and obviously they're a wide receiver factory. But he has really kind of come on. I don't know how much Seahawks you were watching last year. I've watched a lot of Seahawks with Geno Smith in the last 3 years. And they were kind of a fun. The Vikings would play in the noon window, and then the Seahawks would be in the late window. And they were kind of they got on the big screen, and other teams were in the quad box on the small TV a lot. But so I feel like I watched a fair amount of them, and I thought JSN really kind of came into his own last year, especially when they didn't have Metcalf at times, and I thought Lockett had regressed. So how they fill in the role next to him, like what receivers they add. Because I think the important thing to remember with Darnold is that he was throwing to Jefferson and Addison, and Naylor was a solid, serviceable 3rd wide receiver, and Kevin O'Connell is creating this offense. And he's not going to have that in Seattle. Like they fired Will Grubbs. I don't know who their offense coordinator is. Mike McDonald's a defensive mind, so part of me is like, oh, does he want like a game manager? Because I don't really think that's what Darnold is either. And so I would be a little bit concerned that they're not putting Darnold in position to be super successful initially. But I think we have to see how the rest of the offseason kind of plays out in that regard.
Yeah. Good question from DZ. What is the most impactful non-quarterback move you have seen so far? Most impactful non-quarterback move we've seen so far. So, I mean, we, speaking of the Seahawks, obviously DK Metcalf is traded to the Steelers, though we're still trying to figure out who their quarterback is going to be. Is it going to be Russell Wilson? Is it going to be Aaron Rodgers? And thus, because of that, I almost want to say I won't even consider that move because of what the quarterback and I guess offensive situation looks like entirely. Dude, there is a part of me that thinks, and I know he's a little older now, but the Devontae Adams move, getting him to LA when they're about to move on from Cooper Kupp and having him as like a number 2 now, right? With Puka being the number 1 and just getting him in the Sean McVay offense that, in a division that I think is super wide open again. And obviously they won the division last year and they pushed Philadelphia more than anyone did. They had the ball down by 6 points in the snow in the fourth quarter with a chance to take the lead in the final couple of minutes. I don't know if this makes them the slam dunk favorite because again, I think that division is pretty wonky, but there's a part of me that wonders, is that the move that we're looking at in November saying, wow, they got Devontae Adams to go along with Sean McVay and Matt Stafford? I don't know. I think that might be the answer, but it's my first blush answer, I think.
So my first blush one happened, I think, yesterday sometime. And it's in the same vein of where you're talking about a player whose best days is probably behind them, but they're going to a new situation where you're intrigued by it because where they're going, if it works out, I think Bosa to Buffalo with the rest of that defensive line could be really, really fascinating. Like, do we remember what Von Miller kind of looked like when he first initially went there? And Buffalo has such a unique defense where I think the back end is kind of the weaker part of it, but their core of their front with Ed Oliver and Epinesa and those guys had been so good that I think adding someone to Bosa's level of talent, like that kind of innate great pass rusher, that if he stays healthy and if he's motivated because he got released by the team that had drafted him in a place where he had been with LA or San Diego, I think he might have even been there when they were San Diego before they were LA. And so I'm wondering if there's like a little bit of a chip on the shoulder thing here, because if that guy gets going,
if he stays healthy
at Buffalo, they added, he's not Myles Garrett, he's not TJ Watt, but he's like that next level down. Like we saw what Danielle Hunter did for the Texans this past year. He was an elite pass rusher. And it helps an entire defense out. Bosa could be that for a Buffalo defense that's already pretty good. They could go from good to great if you have that kind of pass rush. And, we saw what the Eagles were able to do by taking some veteran pieces and winning up front. And it wasn't their biggest offseason signing by any means. Their biggest offseason signings didn't always come through for the Eagles defensively. Zach Brown or whatever his name is.
Braun, the linebacker.
Braun, yeah. I mean, he was like
huge.
a $4 million signing, and he was incredible for him.
Yeah.
But I just think Bosa to Buffalo makes an already team that I'm always interested in. It makes their defense really, really fascinating because they were a solid defensive team, but we've seen them be better in years past. And it's just, if this guy could do what Von Miller had done in previous years, and just be that straight pass rusher for him, it, I think, really enhances him overall. So that one stood out to me. I mentioned DK Metcalf earlier, largely because, what happens, what does that all look like in Pittsburgh? Like it's,
again, who's their quarterback?
Right. Like it's kind of a weird deal. And is it going to bring back Russell and lob it down the field? I mean, I don't know what they're going to do there, but Metcalf fascinates me because he's such a big-bodied wide receiver. Again, he's more in the T. Higgins mold, where I don't think he's like an elite number 1 wide receiver, but I think he's a unique matchup and he can be really good. And then he gets to play off of Pickens. I think that makes the Steelers pretty interesting. Trying to think of other ones. A lot of the guys that signed, and it was kind of a weak free agent crop. I mean, they're weak in terms of big names. They're like solid players. But there are people like, and I saw Bill Simmons tweet about this. Whenever I watched the Raiders, Robert Spillane always stood out. And so it's like, oh, wow, Robert Spillane was available. That's a good signing for the Patriots. But it's like, is Robert Spillane himself turning anything around? No. But it's just like with one of those kind of notable people. Is there someone else that you can think of that has moved teams here recently where it seems like a big deal?
No, I guess some of it is like the trade stuff, right? Like Laramie Tunsil getting traded to Washington, and just what Washington is doing in general.
The Commanders are beefing up.
Yeah, this is the first time you and I have done a pod since the Deebo Samuel move. I know that's like 2 or 3 weeks into the rearview mirror, and like it's been interesting, man, because you go back and you look at his numbers, and I think that in my head I had built his career up into better than it has been, at least on paper. And you look at his numbers, he had the one good year. I guess you and I talked about it on Sportsmanlike Conduct when you filled in, right?
On your radio program on 1620 or 1620thezone.com or the 1620 The Zone app.
Or YouTube as well. And you'll be on tomorrow.
Wow, YouTube. YouTube.
You and I will be doing the show live from a casino in Carter Lake, so that'll be a good time. But so you and I talked about it there. I was like, man, I feel like I've talked about that move with Schaef. But the 2021 season, spectacular. I mean, his numbers were great. A ton of yards from scrimmage. A lot of touchdowns. Otherwise, that's the only year he's ever had over 1,000 yards receiving. I think he might only have one other year where he's had 1,000 yards from scrimmage. That said, I do think that he is a Swiss Army knife, obviously, and they are going all in. You want to talk about a team on a rookie contract with a quarterback? That's what they're doing, and they're going all in, and they're trying to make their team, win at all costs immediately. And so that move is really, really fascinating to me. But that's not a signing; that's a trade. And so I think that's kind of where I'm at right now too. Is like a lot of the moves that I'm kind of following along with are trades, and then I'm just kind of curious about what's going to happen with the draft and if there are moves that will be made by contenders that are actually going to give them a chance to maybe push a little bit further than they have in the last few years. Or, who is there a quarterback that could come in and do what Daniels did for Washington? I don't think so, especially with the crop of franchises that are going to be drafting at the top. But, dude, if you would have told me a year ago that Daniels was going to take Washington to the NFC Championship game, I would have called you an idiot. So what do I really know, when looking at some of these quarterbacks and who they could go to in the draft?
Yeah, and even as someone who thought Washington was going to be a playoff team, it was largely because I thought the division was going to be bad. And lo and behold, the Super Bowl champion came out of that division. And so clearly, even when you kind of get one right, you misfire in such a horrific manner. That how much credit can you give yourself? So I think what they've been doing is really interesting. Clearly, if you hit on that rookie quarterback, you can build a pretty strong roster. Tunsil is an interesting addition for them. I think the Deebo Samuel thing, it really just depends on in what way he's used by Kingsbury. And I think the fact that it's Cliff Kingsbury has me pretty excited because I think he can play off of McLaurin, who's a really good kind of slot wide receiver that can play in the middle of the field, and you can utilize him in different ways. And then now you have just this threat in Deebo Samuel that can catch the ball out of the backfield, can run the ball on a jet sweep. You can find different ways to utilize. You can run tunnel screens until you're blue in the face with them. Like there's just different ways to utilize that talent. It's also probably I'll be interested in what Deebo Samuel seems like, because early on in his 49ers career, happy-go-lucky player, couldn't have been more thrilled in this situation. And then the last couple of years, just a straight malcontent. So getting him away from San Francisco, does that get him back to being the guy who you'd rather have on your roster than someone who just seemed to be literally fighting with the kicker during a, NFL game? Like, if you're picking on and fighting with the kicker when you have one catch for 2 yards in the same game, there's some issues there.
Yeah, not great. Not great. We have not talked about the Cowboys, and this is a reminder.
They made a big move yesterday.
They did?
Yeah.
You want to tell me who?
Williams.
Yeah.
They signed Javonte Williams. You have your running back.
Yeah, this is very exciting. For those who are maybe tuning in for the first time, this is the only podcast, NFL podcast in America, that's primary focus is the Minnesota Vikings and the Dallas Cowboys. And at the end of last season, a.k.a. like a month and 2 days ago, Schaef was very sad because I was sad and because he doesn't want me to be checked out. Now, of course, I will never be checked out on the NFL, but the Dallas Cowboys have done nothing so far in free agency that leads me excited or feeling better about the season. In fact, they reworked the cap numbers for CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott, and there's this really funny thing that happened amongst Cowboys fans that are complete morons and don't understand how anything works. And CeeDee leaned into it, where he tweeted like, "Look, I got to do anything I can to help the team win," and fans are like, "Thank you, CeeDee. Why doesn't Dak do this?" Meanwhile, Dak did do this, and Dak has done this before because this is what you do after you sign the deal. The next year, you rework the contract so you're not worth as much for them on the cap figure for this upcoming season. They've reworked it. There's a lot of cap room, and yet they continue not to sign Micah to his extension, Smith on the offensive line to his extension. They have they have all these good players, and you look around good franchises in the NFL, and what do good franchises do? They recognize they're good players early, and they say, let's sign them now so we don't have to deal with it later. The cap hit, we'll deal with it, but also in 2 years, it's going to be fine. And now you look at Max Crosby gets his massive deal, and then Myles Garrett gets his massive deal. And Micah Parsons is just tweeting through all of it because he understands how this stuff works. He's informing the fans about this and this and this and this. And it's so dumb. They're wasting time. Just get these deals done and let's move forward because obviously you want Micah Parsons on your team. This is also stupid. And again, I look at the roster and I'm not Brian Schottenheimer. I sometimes, Schaef, his name will come up on a Cowboys podcast, and I have to get reminded that my new head coach is Brian Schottenheimer. Oh, this all sucks. This blows.
Hey, to that effect, I am obviously all on board with Kevin O'Connell now, 3 years in, because I've been able to watch, how he is coached and who he projects himself to be and everything else.
Yeah,
it wasn't that way going into that season. I was intrigued, but I was also like, okay, you hired an offensive coordinator that sat at the behest of one of the best coaches in his generation, and Sean McVay, and how good really can Kevin O'Connell be? I feel like Brian Schottenheimer. Part of it, if his last name wasn't Schottenheimer, I think you could get around this a little bit. It's kind of like I have a buddy that's a Titans fan. And he doesn't dislike Brian Callahan, but
his last name is Callahan.
There's Callahan, and he's related to Bill Callahan, and he grew up as a Nebraska fan. And it's like, if it was just Brian Jones, I think it would be a little bit easier to stomach. And I wonder if it's similar for you because there's just that baggage with the last name Schottenheimer. Yeah. And then there's just sort of baggage of being a Cowboys coach that's kind of unheralded, I guess, in a way. Because your franchise has largely existed to have superstar coaches or celebrity-esque coaches, other than really Jason Garrett and I guess Dave Campo and Chan Gailey. You've had so many coaches. Part of it is that. Yeah. They've just gone through a lot of people since I was first introduced to Jimmy Johnson, and then it was Barry Switzer, and then it was Chan Gailey. Was he after Switzer?
I'm trying to remember the order of it. I believe, yes, it went Chan Gailey after Switzer, and then it was Dave Campo, and then it was Parcells, Wade Phillips, Jason Garrett, Mike McCarthy, and then, now Schottenheimer.
Yeah, I mean, so really it's Garrett, Campo, and even Chan Gailey was a name.
And they went to the playoffs with him. They were fine,
It's Campo and Garrett were the two, and even Jason Garrett was a familiar name for the Cowboys.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those, and whoever the Cowboys quarterback is probably going to become a household name because they're among the biggest franchises in sports, let alone the NFL. So but I feel like most of this podcast, whenever we talk Cowboys, is me just trying to get you to not go too far into the wilderness here. So
yes, 2 years ago you were like, hey, let's slow down. I know you're excited about them, but maybe don't be that excited. And now you're like, hey, I know you're depressed, but maybe don't be that depressed about them. I just need to find my equilibrium. I think that I am in the right place, though. I was like this going into last year. I never bought in. I think, as I become a more informed sports fan, and I feel like I'm always becoming a more informed sports fan, but I now listen and I intake, sadly, more Cowboys content than I have at any point in my life, which I think has made me
welcome to the niche cycle.
Yeah,
this is what's happening with sports fans everywhere. This is a real conversation we can have on Thursday. People are consuming sports less from a league content and more from just my team content.
Definitely. And so I feel like I have a really good handle on him. Like, there's a couple comments from Mavskerbaiter where he brings up a Reddit post that said Dallas basically hasn't spent more than $10 million on a player in free agency since 2015. And then he asks, is it Jerry or is it the kids, a.k.a. Stephen Jones? And those are very good questions, but it's a reminder that, like, I had a conversation with someone, Schaef, who I think is super, super informed on just football and about the NFL especially. It was like, yeah, at least you're going to spend a lot of money. And I was like, no. Dallas doesn't do that anymore. You're thinking of the Dallas, the swashbuckling of the late 90s, early 2000s, bringing in Deion Sanders. Go look at where they spend in terms of just raw dollars. They are near the bottom of the 32 teams, even though they are raking in more than basically everybody. And so it is as I've become more informed, I've become more frustrated, where I kind of missed myself from 5 or 6 years ago, where I could just talk myself into a great season. Now, I don't think that I'd be talking myself into a great season going into this year regardless, just because I think Dak is over the hill. I mean, he's one injury away from being injury prone if he's not already there. And you have a brand new coaching staff, right? Like, they're making a lot of changes. I'm curious to see how they use Micah Parsons, but you're right. That is a good topic for tomorrow's show. Getting more invested in your team and less in the sport at large or the league at large, whatever you watch. But yeah, depressing. But I'll get there. Look, I'll be excited for football season. And now, living in a home with Howling Banks, can invite you over for a Sunday at some point in the fall, and we can watch games together, and we can cook for you. It'll be a lovely time.
I like it. This sounds great. My brain is firing as it often does.
Yes.
And now I'm wondering, as fans, is it a disservice to ourselves if we get more and more invested in the inner workings of everything with our team? Because I feel this way with baseball a lot, because all I do is just get mad about how the Dolans don't spend money and they never will spend money, and how Cleveland's max at this point in 2024 or 25 is going to be like the 25th highest payroll in baseball. And that people there's a segment of the fan base that hangs their hat on the idea that, oh, this front office is so smart. Look how competitive we can be with limited resources. And it's like no one gives you a trophy for that. No one pats you on the back and throws you a parade because you've done the best with limited resources if you don't win a World Series. Mm-hmm. And so then it's like, wasn't sports more fun when I was 12 and I just watched the games and everybody seemed like a superhero? And I didn't really know as much about the athletes, and I had no idea about how the inner workings of all of this works. And now I have all of this knowledge, and I'm just miserable by how the Guardians or then the Indians operate, or even with the Vikings and sort of this whole concept of like, oh, you got to maximize the rookie quarterback contract instead of you should maximize the effing roster, morons.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think the answer to that is yes.
I think the people who are less day-to-day invested in their team are probably happier sports fans, which then is like a really kind of sad thing, because our entire livelihood is based on people being really invested in Nebraska athletics, which only makes them sad. So we are drug dealers of sadness, Josh. We are.
Thinking of The Wire season 3. You want some of that pandemic? Pandemic? Wow.
I don't know what our version of Hamsterdam is, but that's what Lincoln, Memorial Stadium is basically Hamsterdam. People come there and they become depressed fiends, and then they just get more and more depressed, and then they're so hooked on it they can't get off of it.
Matt writes, as we get ready to wind down, show title, Drug Dealers of Sadness. Wow, that is perhaps a topic again that we could unpack a little bit more tomorrow. That we are, because I honestly, as I have continued to think about Nebraska football, you and I had a big picture conversation when you filled in for John last week about why the hell is it so quiet and what is going on. And you had a really interesting theory about it, just because we don't know the roster. But yes, we drug dealers of sadness is what we have turned into for Husker athletics. And for me, for my favorite Cowboys podcast,
come get hooked.
They have definitely been that way for me. Wow. All right. So there's a recap of like 3 things that have happened in NFL free agency so far.
Okay, so before we go,
the whole league, we didn't give you the whole league, but yes, what's your question?
Before we go, and it's not a Monday, so I don't have to definitely be out at 8:35, so we can go a little longer if you want.
Okay.
Are there Is there a team besides the Commanders that you think definitely improved themselves this offseason?
Team definitely besides the Commanders. I can tell you a team that I definitely don't think improved themselves, and that is the 49ers. There was a post a little bit earlier from...
They're going into a new period of their...
Enjoy not having a quarterback on a rookie contract anymore.
No chicken for you.
My quick answer. Oh, hey, I will say this. I'm happy that the Cowboys re-signed Turpin. So I'm happy about that. There is one thing that I'm happy about. That got obviously better. I don't have a team for that. Do you? Do you have a team where you're like, wow, hell of some moves there. Good job by you, team.
I think what the Colts have done is kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know that they're going to be obviously better, but I would rather, if I was a Colts fan, I'd feel better about having a Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson kind of competition. They've spent money elsewhere. Cam Bynum was a good signing. They went and got another corner. I think they did some sort of interesting stuff so far. The Patriots feel like they've thrown a bunch of money at things, but I don't know that they've gotten better.
Correct.
I think they've used their cap space, but their roster was kind of flawed to begin with, so it's hard to know like where they're going. The jumping off point is, did they improve like a 4-win team to a 6-win team? That's kind of what it feels like to me right now. And I still don't know that there's enough around Drake May for him to be a successful quarterback in this league, because even as of right now on March 12th, I have no idea who his number one option is going to be, or who that person should be. And that's kind of a concerning thing when you have a young quarterback. By
the way, I think Drake May is way overrated. Now, part of that is probably just listening to Simmons, and he's the guy who always talks about him. But every time I watched him last year, I was like, am I missing something? Why am I talking about him?
I would trade JJ McCarthy for Drake May today.
Well, yeah, you would trade JJ McCarthy for a sandwich at lunch today from Block 16. So, that's not really saying a whole lot.
But the sandwich doesn't have arms, so the sandwich...
You can have JJ McCarthy. I want the sandwich.
Our friends at Block 16 have not invented a sandwich that can get the ball to Justin Jefferson. And so until they do, I would probably prefer JJ McCarthy to the sandwich. So I'm sure the sandwich would be delicious. Okay. There's really not. It feels like we're kind of in the middle of this, and so we'll see where we come out on the other side. The obvious team that I think has gotten better is the Commanders. The obvious team that has gotten worse is the 49ers. I would be a little bit concerned as a Seahawks fan about what the plan is to put around Sam Darnold.
Yes.
I think the Cardinals have been kind of quiet, and I don't know that they're up against it cap-wise. They went and got somebody from the Eagles, a defensive player that was pretty good for the Eagles, that's now reunited with Gannon down there. And I'm blanking on who the name is. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. And I'm also blanking on the name at this moment in time, too. We need somebody to help us out.
Was it this is where Riss needs to be awake.
I know. She just woke up.
Is it a linebacker? I am blanking on this hard. I just read about it, and naturally I didn't have anything pulled up to.
Was it Josh Sweat?
Double back up. Yes, it was Josh
Sweat. Yeah.
So he's a defensive lineman.
Yeah.
So trying to think if there's anybody else. I mean, I like the Geno Smith move for the Raiders. I'm curious about how that looks with Pete Carroll and how quickly that roster, which I thought was good last year. Like, I thought the roster was good. They had a quarterback issue. And now I think you have a competent quarterback. Can that roster jump off with Pete Carroll as you have a competent coach instead of whatever Antonio Pierce is doing week in and week out?
Yeah, so I do like Pete Carroll.
They're sort of a team, and the hard thing is that division.
Division's brutal. Yeah, and we barely talked about the runners-up in the Super Bowl. Like, what the hell happens with the Chiefs? Like, moving forward, I think is, of course, super interesting. One of the most popular franchises in the league right now, the best quarterback in the league, and kind of what their next act looks like. I think there was the Tyreek Hill era of the Mahomes experience, and now we have been living in the post-Tyreek Hill era of the Mahomes experience. And I mean, you and I said it all season long, like, this is the worst version of them so far, even though their record, I guess maybe the year before was the worst version because they had a bad regular season.
Yeah, they were better than the year before where they ended up winning the Super Bowl.
But we're probably looking at the two worst teams so far of the Mahomes era. And it's funny, they went to the Super Bowl twice and they won one of them. So it's like, oh, wow, let me cry for you a little harder. But what happens with them next, I think is it's going to say a lot about the future of the AFC and the future of the league.
Well, what happens with Xavier Worthy and everything that comes out of that? And then, you've had back-to-back off seasons where your rookie wide receiver does something really stupid in the state of Texas. So maybe you have to avoid Texas-based wide receivers going forward, which cuts out a lot of players.
So we're not going to Texas anymore.
Well, look, you drafted Rice from SMU and Worthy from the University of Texas, and I think you got to stay out of Texas for a little bit. But we'll see.
So that's what's going on in the NFL. Schaef and I will be doing something around the draft. We have not made any plans, so stay tuned for that. I know that on one of our last pods, we also mentioned maybe bringing Michael Severe on to talk about some stuff. So we'll reach out to Michael. I don't know if mornings on weekdays work for him, so maybe a night pod if Michael is able to join us.
I think we just got to get on his schedule. I think you just have to get on the schedule, and then you're okay.
You're good to go.
You can block it off. Yeah.
All right. So we'll try to do that.
We'll work with him.
Yeah. We'll do something surrounding the draft. So just stay tuned for details there. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, Mike Schaefer will be filling in tomorrow on Unsportsmanlike Conduct. So if you want more of these great conversations, you can actually stop by the Prairie.
Swearing.
With less swearing, that's true. Prairie Flower Casino is where we will be in Carter Lake. If you want to come see us, or of course just listen on 1620 The Zone. Schaef is also a Wednesday regular on my show. He'll be joining us later today on Unsportsmanlike Conduct to talk about whatever we end up talking about. Schaef, was it the final Husker Hoops pod of the season that you did on Monday, or are you gonna do another one maybe as the embers slowly burn out of hate and frustration over the next few days? You're going to do another one next week?
I think we'll have more Husker 24/7 Hoops casts in the future. If they end up playing in the Crown, I'm sure we will discuss that at some point. If they, when they get into the off season and they have the transfer portal moves, I'm sure we will discuss the roster at some point. And then it'll go away for a while because the summer for college basketball is the ultimate dead zone. Which is kind of nice. It's nice that there's a sport that just dies out and isn't continuously changing its rules or doing something, idiotic in the off season. But we'll see how that goes. And then, of course, the regular Husker 24/7 podcast will continue operations. BC and I will get together this morning and discuss what Matt Rule had to say yesterday. And, all of the stuff that you hated. I am excited to have conversations with you today or tomorrow about the getting credit for the Colorado game and everything else that came out of that. So I look forward to these conversations.
All right, perfect. So that's a nice tease of the other things to come. And, of course, subscribe to Husker 24/7 Sports. And remember, once you get past the free trial, Paramount Plus, you get a subscription to Paramount Plus, which is a great streaming app and has many, many movies on it and television shows as well. So you can get all of that and more. Schaef, always great to talk some NFL with you, even if we're both frustrated for a variety of reasons by our favorite teams. But thanks for stopping by this morning and talking a little NFL with me.
Absolutely. Anytime I can get really annoyed by 8:40 in the morning, I need to do it. It's good for my blood pressure.
Yes, I think it definitely is. And Banks seems to be okay now. He's asleep. So I can't wait to ask him, why were you howling? Is everything okay? Maybe there's a mass murderer that is just standing outside my door. I can't wait to find out after we log off on the podcast. By the way, coming up. Yeah, yes, please do. Coming up in the ID Club, we got ID Live with Jack and I tonight for subscribers only. Patreon.com/ID Club if you would like to hang out with us. Mike Schaefer stops by the Discord server from time to time as well. Also, a brand new episode of Volleyball State went up yesterday on their feed as well as the Patreon feed if you want to check that out. Also, the ID Club YouTube channel. Emily Londot from the Omaha Supernovas joined them. Plus, they talked a little bit about some of the off seasons moving and shaking. And I don't think, Schaef, that they planned on doing as much of the bonus content as they did, but they have picked up so many subscribers that they've basically done once a week so far. It will not be that way throughout the offseason, but they've been a welcome addition to the ID Club, so you can find out more information at patreon.com/I80 Club. And then, Jack and I back tonight at 8 o'clock for subscribers. Schaef, have a lovely rest of your Wednesday, and I'll talk to you again in 6 hours?
All right, sounds good. I look forward to it.
All right, me too. For Mike Schaefer of Husker 24/7 Sports, I'm Josh Peterson. Thanks so much for joining us today. National Fun League on the ID Club. Goodbye.